So, hello everyone. Today we have a very special guest, an interesting personality, especially in the world of perfumery. He is known with his unique perspective and unique points of view when it comes to perfumery, when it comes to popular claims, popular statements. We have with us Rémi. Rémi, thank you for accepting the invitation and accepting to share your knowledge with our audiences.
My pleasure. So, yeah, I am Rémi. I'm glad to be here. I've been into the perfume world since 2016, and I've been composing fragrance since 2018. I'm lucky enough to have entered everything through the English side of fragrances. And as some of you may know, the thing with the English-speaking side is that maybe they don't have the legacy knowledge about fragrances, but they will try everything in terms of do-it-yourself. So you find a lot of information here and there on various forums, Discord, Reddit, etc. And it's a good way to get the ball rolling, to get some first feedback about how to start everything, which is how I started doing fragrances, buying my stuff, etc. Since then, I have been the co-owner of one of the biggest Discord servers about fragrances in general, 10,000 people now. The biggest subreddit and one of the biggest communities about do-it-yourself fragrance. So people who want to learn how to do it, this is the place to be. We are 31,000 subscribers on it, which is a big community for the internet.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. You have one of the biggest, even if not, it's the biggest community of do-it-yourself perfumery in Reddit. You have also a newsletter sent to the web where you share your knowledge. So everyone here, if you want to join Rémi for more knowledge, he's on TikTok and Instagram under the name Rémi the Kodo. On Reddit, it's the subreddit named DIY perfumery, do-it-yourself perfumery, and there is an interesting thing about you is that you are an expert in branding and marketing, especially the B2B business. And so you have this two perspective, the perspective of a marketer, so that you can understand the audience, their needs, their wants, how the market moves, and the perspective of a fragrance creator, an independent perfumer. You said since 2016, 2017, which is a long time enough to be an expert fragrance creator. So yes, thank you. Perfumery is a secretive industry for bad reasons. You said this once. So can you explain more what exactly is kept secret and what are these bad reasons and who benefits from this secrecy?
Yes, of course. So the thing about perfumery in general is that it's a pretty new thing. It's been less than 2 centuries since we started doing perfumery the way we think about it today. Before that, perfumery was mainly about religion, the sacred, and medicine, and a little bit for royalty, but even that was not that common. So since then, the thing is that unlike a field like fashion, the graphic arts, or even cooking, it's been industrial since the start. Because it depends a lot on industry, on being able to harvest a lot of one plant to create some essential oils, for example, which means that the whole industry is structured around 5 big companies, basically. So the IFF, Givaudan, Man, all of these that specialize in creating fragrances. And the thing is that they create fragrances, but they also train the perfumers. They do the research and development about the materials. So basically, they do everything except the brand. The brands are on the outside of this, and they usually contract those perfumers who work for these companies. So these companies have no interest in releasing the secrets because this way they keep the power on the market, which means that for people like you and I, it's very difficult to get into how you compose fragrances and everything because most of the information that you will find is actually false outside of the subreddits, maybe the base note forum. There are a few places like that, a few books here and there, but even those, there are not that many. Some YouTube videos, the content I produce, for example, but that's actually quite rare, very niche. And if you are not looking actively for it, you will find and you will rely on false information. But it's good for them because then they don't have competition.
Exactly. Me too. One of the most difficult things that I'm facing and I'm still facing is that to find the credible sources for knowledge, the real people who share knowledge, who share something that is credible, that is true. And I can confidently say that I'm lucky that I found your account on TikTok. I don't know how, but I found some of your videos on my For You page, and I can say that I asked you so many questions over the last year, and you were very kind. You gave me answers, real answers, and then after months, I read some books and I find the same answer you told me in these books. I'm totally 100% sure that you share credible information. So yeah, thank you for your answer. Nowadays, the perfume lovers want to look at perfumes and want to consider perfumes as a form of art, a piece of art, a masterpiece. But I think the reality is something else. Do you think that nowadays perfumes can be considered as an art form or just a commodity that lacks creativity? What's your take on this?
It's a bit of both, because I think that we have more people doing art in the form of olfaction today than there was before. Because before that, like the 21st century, you had maybe 5 guys that were making the best fragrances, and the rest were people that work in labs, but they were not really interested in making art. Nowadays, you have a lot of independent people who are doing great olfactory art. You have some bigger perfumers also that can do that, but the industry side of things and the volume of releases that we have, which wasn't the norm before. Like every brand, especially the big ones, are releasing multiple fragrances every year. Of course, most of them are not going to be good, even from great brands, because they live by the fact that they have to release constantly new stuff to try and follow the trends instead of doing good stuff, but take their time. And I think that's where we have the problem with art. Another part of it, of course, is that fragrances are not seen as art by most people, because most people, when they buy a fragrance, they go to, for example, Sephora and a place like that, and it's not an experience that is good for experiencing fragrances. It's not good to buy fragrances in that environment, and so you're never going to consider a fragrance as art if the way you buy it is basically a big supermarket that smells way too much of a lot of things.
Exactly. They are being marketed and branded as piece of art, but so you can give us some these names that are making olfactive art?
Yes, of course. For example, Naomi Goodsir is a brand that has been very stable in their release. They don't release that many fragrances every year, and like for example, Nuit de Bacchus, which is one of their fragrances, is one of the best tuberose fragrances in the last decade, and it's still here today. It doesn't even cost that much money, but people are not buying it because they don't even know it exists. And they might be afraid as well because it's a very powerful and white floral. So it's not for everybody, of course, but art, like every piece of art, is not for everybody. It's okay to dislike something, even if you know that it's like a masterpiece, but at least you get a strong reaction for it. And I think that's something that fragrances in general are very good at doing, is making you have a strong reaction, especially the first time you smell a fragrance. It can create a lot of emotions that you wouldn't have, for example, for something visual, because the things that are visual are usually, like, we are more used to them and we interpret them and we process them in our brain very differently, like everything that's visual, we try to create something that's very coherent, we try to analyze them a lot. The fragrance stuff, we get a blast of it.
Exactly, yes.
Especially for people who are not like accustomed to smelling tons and tons of stuff. And when we smell something that's very different, that's artistic in nature, it can create very strong emotions to people. And I think that's what's good about fragrance.
Yes, exactly. I have always this idea that we can support and we can stand to sit and have coffee in a bad place and that is not visually good. But you can never sit and have coffee in a place where it's bad smelling and have bad odor. So yes.
Exactly.
Totally on point. When talking to creativity, one of your statements that is a lot of noise in social media. François Demachy, the creative director of Dior, is good only at cutting costs and he has no creativity. Can you explain more on this point? Why do you consider François Demachy as not creative? In fact, the perfume lovers saw him as a hero, as a creative, as someone who is innovative in reality?
Well, I think it's because they realize most of the people who think that the releases that he has done were very good don't really understand what Dior was before. And for example, the time Woodnisca was there, Polge was there, even though they were not necessarily like the in-house perfumers, the releases that they made for the brand are still here today and are some of the best fragrances on the market. The version that got changed maybe 2 or 3 years ago by a new Demachi version was so interesting back in 2005, for example. The start of the private line, the 3 first fragrances that they released, so Eau Noire, Cologne Blanche, and Bois d'Argent, were some of the best fragrances on the market when they got released. And most of the releases after that, in that collection, especially the private collection, are just not good. They are here to fill a catalog of notes that are on trend. And for example, you could see when they were trying to get into the Middle East, because they released a whole lot of amber and wood and sandalwood. And then they were trying to appeal in 2018 to the Chinese market. So they made Lucky, they made Kashmir, they made a rose but lighter, etc., to try to appeal to Chinese consumers. And then a lot of them were very derivative. And you could see that not a lot of work and thought processes went to them because they were very simple. And especially at that price point, for a brand which is positioned as a luxury brand.
Luxury brand, yes.
It's just not acceptable, Like, compared to, for example, what Mathilde Laurent does at Cartier, the Cartier private lines are way better than the private line at Dior. There is no comparison possible.
Yes, a lot of his work is just reformulation and reworks of other works.
Exactly.
That is okay, yes.
And a lot on the designer side, it was mostly reformulations and flankers.
Exactly, yes. I saw recently a lot of critics and criticism for François Curjian for his work in Dior, and they said that he has done nothing. He has no success in Dior. What's your take on the work that François Curjian has done and is doing in Dior?
I think he's actually doing better than François Demachi, but the problem is that he already has a big catalog to work from. A lot of the things that are being released today, the work started maybe 2 years ago, so he wasn't even here, making the decision, And I think, surprisingly, that his Dior Homme Intense, for example, the Intense or the Parfum, I don't remember the last one that was released, is actually pretty good, because if you think about it, the Dior Homme was changed, but they hadn't changed the flankers that go with it. And so there was a huge mismatch between what Dior Homme means in 2025 and the rest of the line. So they had to change it. It had to make more sense. And the DNA that he has used for this is actually pretty good. It's just that because it's very different, of course, from what it used to be, but it was the same for Dior Homme versus Dior Homme Original, who really liked the original formulation, who bought it and had multiple bottles of it, and etc., were of course not happy about it. But I think in general, he has not released some masterpieces yet at Dior, and I hope he will. But it's actually he's doing pretty decent work. He's taking risks as well. Because, for example, something like New Look, the new version was a risky bet. I don't like it, but it was a risky bet.
The new version of Dior Homme Intense, a lot of perfume lovers, they said that they brought the first and the old version of Dior Homme Intense. Do you find this accurate? Yes, no?
Well, I know that a lot of people liked the previous version, but even the previous version was not that great compared to the original version of Dior Homme Original.
Yes.
Most people liked it because it was stronger, not because it smelled better.
Okay, so you said I think in a video that the success of the fragrances of Dior comes mainly from the work of Olivier Polge and Edmond Rodniska. Why do you think is this success comes from the work of these two perfumers or creative directors?
It's cutting a little bit on your end, but the success of Dior definitely comes from Olivier Polge and Edmond Rodniska. I am pretty sure that those two perfumers have made more great fragrances than what was released before that. Something like Diorissimo, for example, is still here and it's a great fragrance. Not everything was a success because, for example, Woodnisha released the fragrance named Dior for Dior, and this one wasn't a hit. So not everything works, of course. But those perfumers had, I think, higher expectations about what they wanted on the market, and now I feel like it's more about like the marketing team dictating what they want to release, more so than the perfumers having some say on it. How niche perfumes are made, right?
Yes.
The steps
Are they based on a brief marketing, or they are made out of an inspiration, artistic work, something like this?
So it depends a lot on the brand. Some brands, they have perfumers that are okay with offering their insight, and sometimes the perfumer is actually one of the people that work inside the brand. A good example of that is Parfum d'Empire, for example, which is a brand owned by a perfumer. So that one, of course, the creativity comes from inside. And so there is no marketing brief. It's what he wants to do, and he does. On the other side, you have the rest of the brand. Most of them are actually, yes, giving brief to perfumers that are going to give them elements. Some of them will be text, it might be music, it might be pictures about what impression, what story they want to tell through the fragrance. And of course, there are the worst case scenarios where they are trying to do something like another successful fragrance. That happens a lot, even in niche perfumery, sadly, these days.
Okay. And niche fragrances niche fragrance houses don't even have the formulas of their own perfumes. They don't even know what's ingredients in it. Can you explain more about this? Because this is interesting.
Yes, so this is something that happens a lot. Basically, you have to think about it the same way you would think about graphic design. As long as the graphic designer is an external person, if you don't ask them to give you the files, the raw files that they use to make whatever graphic they make, they will keep them. And it's the same for perfumery. If the perfumer is not contractually obligated, and it's very hard to get this contractual obligation when you're working with big ones, Givaudan, IFF, etc., you are never going to have that formula. But the thing is that a lot of brand owners actually don't really care, and they don't even know what the fragrance formula looks like that much. So that's one of the problems in this industry, is that most of the time, unlike, for example, fashion, where you would have a fashion designer in-house, the creative person is on the outside of the team. It's in their interest, because the less they communicate about this, the less people will know their secret, how fragrances work, and of course, the chances of getting copied are lower. And so, yes, that's something very important, is that most of the time, the fragrance houses, they don't have the formula, because the ownership is actually on the side of the company that makes the fragrance. And of course, they don't want this released because we don't have intellectual protection in the fragrance. You cannot patent the formula. So as soon as someone knows what in your fragrance, they can copy it, and you cannot do anything about it. You cannot copy the name, because that one can be trademarked. But on the other side, you can copy the formula.
Another question for you, Remy, is I hear often a popular claim and a popular statement that is the big brands and niche perfumes are expensive due to the advertising costs, the big campaigns, and the high-end collaborations. Is this really justified? Are these campaigns and advertising and influencers collaborations justify the price of niche fragrances, or there is something else we don't know?
So the price of niche perfumes comes from the difference in scale and the cost of the concentrate. Those two things influence a lot what the cost of a fragrance is going to be. If you buy a cheap fragrance at Sephora, a designer fragrance, the cost of concentrate is probably going to be on the lower end, so probably something like 50 euros per kilo or less. At best, it's going to be 70 euros. In the fragrance world, if you get to the niche side, usually it's going to be 150 euros to 200 euros per kilo, sometimes even more. Anatole Le Breton, for example, who is a French independent perfumer, has a formula which is above 1,000 euros per kilo to make. And this is crazy expensive. And of course, all the costs add in, you have to remember that this is a physical product which is flammable, which requires specific permits to be shipped. specific permits to be sold because you put it on skin. So you have a lot of legislation around fragrances that doesn't exist in other fields.